Welcome to this presentation on what's new in formz version 9. Over the next half hour or so, I'm going to cover some of the new features in formz 9, get some hands-on experience with it, and I hope you're as excited as we are about this new version and the future of formz. Let's start with the new formz 9 interface. So here's what formz 9 looks like when you start up. We've got our startup screen, gives you easy access to recently opened files and easy ways to create new projects. So I can just click on the new project button down here and I'm off and running with a new project. Right away you'll notice that the interface is all running inside of a nice single frame here so that everything is nicely tied together. As I resize things, everything nicely resizes together, and I can dynamically change my palettes, and you'll see that everything stays nicely tight together as opposed to having things that would overlap on each other, and making it a lot easier to have the nice workspace here. We have docks on the top and left and like previous versions, but we also have a few extra docks in here to hold some of the palettes. So, and these docks, not only can they be resized, but you can actually, for example, we can move this dock up to the top if we want to have our palettes up there, so nicely moves them in one easy action. So just move that back down to where it goes. Palettes in the dock on the right are mostly the contents for your project. So these all, and we can have title bars on these so we can move them in and out of the dock if that's something that you want to do. Now, the palettes in the top sections and down here, we've taken out the title bars because we're using a lot of screen space for something that you very rarely did. So if you want to move some palettes around, you want to hold the Command key down on the Mac or the Control on Windows, and you can still pull one of these out. So if I want to pull this guy out and have it floating along, he can. So you're fully able to customize the interface and move things around, and I can just drag him back into and put him back in there. He snaps back into place. So that's the overall layout of the palettes. On the palettes on the right hand side, we also have a little button here to detach a palette so we can easily move it out of the window. So if I detach that one, for example, it's out. Now this palette in particular, I want to point out, introduces a new feature we call stacking palettes. So this allows palettes to be all contained within a single window so that all the content is shared in this window and I can switch back and forth between it. So this by default, the palette in the bottom right corner will have stacked in at a number of palettes. If I wanted to take one of these stacked palettes out, I can simply hold the Command key on Mac or Control key on Windows and just drag this guy out. So if I want him to be out on his own, now he's his own palette as he was before. Or I can always hold the Command key and drag him back on top, and now he's back in there. And we can also reorder these as to orient them the way we want. Or if there's a couple of palettes that we frequently might want to use together, again, holding the Command or Control, I can drag it out and do that. And now I've got these two line weights and line styles together as a separate stacked palette. So that's the palette stacking feature that we have, and all the palettes that show you the contents of things that are within a formz file can be stacked like this, and I can even put these guys back together. So that's the palette stacking feature. Now, in addition to all of these changes, we have added some new palettes I'd like to point out. So up at the top there is an area here that, let me just draw a simple shape real quick. And so up here we have something we call the project palette, and this will show you all the projects that you have open. Currently I just have one project, so let me make a new project. And now you'll see up at the top that I have Untitled 1 and Untitled 2, both of my projects, and I can easily switch back and forth just by clicking here, and I'm going to switch back and forth between those projects. So easy to see what you have open because it's here. They still show in the window menu, but it's a lot easier to see everything that you have open, and if you want to switch over to one of those projects that's right there, or maybe I want to close one that I'm not using anymore, I can just click there to close it without having to bring the window forward and then close it. So that's a little bit easier to use. Another thing that we heard from customers is that a lot of the options in the edit menu, it was kind of hard to have to go click the edit menu to open it all the time to see the status of things like your status of objects and so on. So we've introduced a new edit options palette. It's right here. Actually, I'm gonna use my command key. I'm gonna pull it out here. Okay, and here we see the new palette that we have, the edit options palette, showing my status of objects and all of these settings like locking of groups and so on. So this is a nice visual feedback for these settings, as well as an easy way to get to them. Again, saving clicks without having to go to the edit menu or to see what the status is or to change them. So that's that is the edit options palette. I'll just put him back in place. Okay, the third palette I'd like to show you is the inspector palette. So let's bring him up. So the inspector palette, previously in previous versions of formz, this was available in the lower part of the tool options for the pick tool. But we got a lot of feedback that people wanted to have access to that outside of just the pick tool. So now it's its own palette, and it does show you the details about what's selected, so you can see the information about it, and you can get to its attributes and parameters just as you did in the past when it was in the pick options, but now it's out here independent. And we've put a convenient button in there when you do have the pick tool selected to bring this palette up. So if you're used to looking for it there, now you can bring that palette up. One more feature that I'd like to highlight, the favorites tool menu that we have is an important thing for someone, especially using a large monitor, because it allows you to get to tools that you use frequently without needing to travel the mouse all the way up to the tool icons. But you still have to travel the mouse over to change the options. So we've added a new feature in formz 9, and I'm just tapping the space bar, which is the default for the favorites menu. And if I press that a second time, now I get the options for that tool showing up at the location of the cursor. And I can just change an option here, like I want to go back to turn to the self mode instead of the copy mode. And as soon as the mouse leaves the area of the tool options that are shown on the screen, it disappears. And so now I can keep working. So this really improves workflow on large monitors, because now I don't need to travel over to the tool options to get to it. So once again, double tapping the space bar, which is the default shortcut for the favorites menu, gets me to the tool options at the location of the screen. And as soon as the mouse travels out of that, or I hit the key shortcut again, the tool options are going to go away. So that's a really great way when you're working on a large monitor to get to the tool options from the favorites menu. The next feature I'd like to show you is reference files. Reference files allow you to store your model in separate formz files and then reference those models from other projects. This allows you to store bulky static data in separate files, and it allows you to collaborate with other team members who can be working in those separate formz files and link to your project so you can see their contents update. Let's take a look at what reference files look like in formz. So let's look at a model here. This is a trade show booth, thanks to Nick at Creative Solutions Group for sharing this with us. So it's an automotive trade show booth design. And in addition to the booth that we're working on, we have these cars that we've placed for reference in here. And the cars are an important part of the model, an important part of the presentation to the customer, but we're not designing the cars. They're really static data, and they've got a lot of information in them, a lot of polygons, a lot of textures, etc. So this is an excellent candidate to be put into a reference file. Let's see how we would do that. I'm going to pick the object, or objects, in this case just the one, that I want to put into the reference file. And then I'm going to go to the Create Reference File item in the File menu. And I'm going to name this reference file. So this is a Viper, so we'll call it Viper. And we'll just save that off to a reference file. So what formz is doing now is collecting all the geometry, all the materials, the layers, lights if they're selected, whatever's been picked, and saving those into its own file. And now you can see that the model doesn't look any different, but this piece of geometry is now off in a reference file. And we can take a look at what that looks like, just to see the reference file by itself. So there it is, Viper. You can open that up and look at the reference file. You'll see that it looks just as if we had clipped that car out of there into its own file, but it is a 3D formz file. It's not just clip art. But there you go. That's the reference file that we've just created. So an easy way to create that from right within formz. So let's just close that and go back and look at our model again. So now when I save or an autosave, for example, of this project, it doesn't have to resave that car every time, which isn't getting changed. So that's an important thing that will improve your workflow. Now let's look at another use of reference files here. Let's change our view and look a little bit further out of their booth. There's our Viper sitting in the middle there, and let's take a look at this truss up here. So actually this file has already been created with the truss as a reference file. If I go to the reference file manager here, we can see that there's the truss listed above it as a reference file, and also we see the Viper that we just created. So this interface will show you a list of all the reference files you have, and also you can control their transformations and so on, so you can place them anywhere in the file. But let's go take a look at that roof truss and imagine, if you will, that somebody else is actually working on this file. So you could actually have someone else in this file, or working with it yourself. But if it was in a shared location, someone else could be making these changes just as easily. So let's make a few changes to this file. I'm going to go in here. Let's say we don't want this cover that we have in there, and maybe we want to change the color of the truss. Let's just make it bright yellow, so it's an obvious change here. And right, so now we've got our truss nicely colored. So let's save this guy. I'll just close it and save it. And once that file is saved, formz is going to recognize that the file has changed, and it's going to offer you the option to reload that into our booth file. So here it goes. It's just confirming that you want to reload it. You can set this to auto or manual reloading, so you get reloaded anytime the file changes, or at any time that you're ready for it. So we're just going to say OK, and since we closed that window, we'll be switching back to our booth, and there it is. There you see that the new updated truss has been displayed in our main booth file here. So that's reference files, using them both to save bulky content out to its own file, or using it in a collaborative method where someone else could be working on the truss and sharing it with the designer here. I'd like to take a minute to talk about the performance improvements in formz version 9. You'll notice a faster startup, more efficient memory management, and a new instance engine that makes components more efficient. That same instance engine is used for reference files and used for copying large objects, making this perform much better in version 9. Also, we've improved the formz file format. It now supports file sizes larger than 2 gigabytes, and files open and save faster. And you'll notice faster autosave as well with formz version 9. Now, these changes to the formz format do require a new formz 9 format. So if you're saving your files to version 8 or earlier, you would need to use the Save a Copy As feature. Next, let's take a look at the Symmetry Tool in formz 9. The Symmetry Tool applies symmetry to an object to create a new form. The Symmetry Tool is sensitive to the type of object that you work on and has different features varying for 2D shapes, 3D solids, sub-Ds, and NURBS. And these symmetric operations can be retained by the object so that future operations applied to the object maintain the symmetry. And then it can also be cleared in the inspector palette. Let's take a look at how the Symmetry Tool works. The Symmetry Tool is located in the Transform group of tools, and as I mentioned, it works a little bit differently depending on what type of object you apply it to. So let's start by looking at some 2D shapes here. Here's 2D spline that I've drawn. I'm going to pick it with the Symmetry tool, and you see that formz identified the open edges there and constructed a symmetry plane at the edge of the open edges to create a symmetric object from our source. We get a reference plane here that we can control if we want to try some manipulations of that a little bit, and we can control whether these connect or not. Let me move this a little further apart so you can see that whether or not we are actually connecting the shape to make a closed shape or not. So there we very quickly made a symmetric object that can be sometimes hard to construct. Now, just to show you this a little bit further, the symmetry is actually retained, and if I roll over the object with my pick tool, you'll see that the symmetry line shows up again. So it's just a reminder that this is a symmetric object. And if I wanted to use a tool, for example, here to insert an opening in here, you'll notice that the opposite side is updated as soon as I complete the operation. So say that's a form that I wanted, and now I've very easily made a symmetric version of it. So that's the Symmetry tool applied to a 2D shape. Now, if we wanted to keep working with this object and have it no longer be symmetric, we would clear this with the inspector palette. So if I open up the inspector palette and I click on an object and I look at its info, here you see it tells me whether this is a symmetric object or not, and if we don't want it to be symmetric anymore, we can just clear it right there, and now that's no longer symmetric in any operation that I do. And just to show you that, I'll punch another hole here. You'll see that that one did not apply. The object is just a regular object now. So that's some example of symmetry. Let's do one more. Over here, I have another shape. Now, if I start with this, connecting the ends is really maybe not the meaningful shape that I wanted to get. So we have some other options here to control where the reference plane goes, and we can construct that relative to the open end. So we can go tangent to the start or to the end of the object to create either one of these shapes. I'm going to create a shape like this. I'm going to leave this endpoint open, so you see I create this type of shape. And actually I'm going to show you how you can use the Symmetry tool repeatedly. So now I've created that shape. Now I'm going to use the Symmetry tool on this shape again, and now it's connected the open ends again, and I've created this I-beam shape, so by applying the tool twice in a row. So that's symmetry on a 2D shape. Now let's look at symmetry on a 3D shape. I'm just going to create a shape here, and I'm going to use my Symmetry tool on it. Here again, this is just some example of something to show you how it works. So we've again constructed our symmetry plane. We can control exactly where it's placed to affect the shape, but that's our plane of symmetry has now been applied to the object. And once again, after I pick on it, you see we're getting the dashed line indicating that this is a symmetric object in 3D. So again, changes that I make on one side are going to be applied to the other. So I'll come along here and do this type of shape. If I then reshape this up, you'll see that the symmetric object is the symmetry side is following along with me. Just do a couple of operations to give you an idea of how you can create something symmetric this way. So there's a quick symmetric 3D object, and once again I can clear that symmetry if that's something that I want to do with the inspector. When the Symmetry tool is used on a inNURBS object, the symmetry is applied to the underlying controls, not to the surface itself. And we can apply symmetry at the edge of a surface or in the middle of the surface. So I'll do an example on the edge of the surface here. So if I pick on this edge of the surface, we're going to make it symmetric around that edge, and you can see we've added extra controls in that direction. And now if we look at the control points, first of all, when I highlight it, you see the symmetry plane there showing us, indicating that it is symmetric. I'm going to show controls on this, and now that I can see the controls, if I were to move those controls, so let's say, for example, I grab this bottom control line here and move it, you would see that the control lines on the opposite side of the plane will react in kind, like that. So that's symmetry applied to a NURBS object. Now let's look at sub-Ds. Here's a sub-D model, thanks to Jerry Farrell, who created this model for us. We're going to look at what happens when we apply symmetry to a sub-D. So this can be kind of fun. Let's click on our Symmetry tool and click on our sub-D model. Now, the symmetry plane by default was picked there, which gave us kind of a interesting shape. You can see the symmetry has been applied and the dog's feet are turned around. But we can choose what plane is used for symmetry, and now we have the plane that's down the dog's axis, and just to have some fun, we can see what happens if we move this. Now here again, the symmetry plane, the symmetry is being applied to the underlying cage of a sub-D object. So again, here we've changed his form quite a bit. So this is yet another tool that you can use along with the other sub-D tools to work with sub-D objects. And so now that it's symmetric, we can make some changes to this dog. Let's say, for example, we wanted to make one of the feet bigger. We can use one of our symmetry tools here. We'll go to the stretch tool, and we're going to, a pretty small model, so let's say we just stretch it a little bit here. There you go. You see what happens. Obviously both sides reacted in kind, so keeping the symmetry between them, and now he's got two puppy paws. So that's the symmetry tool when applied to a sub-D object. Next, let's look at some more transformation tools that are new in formz 9. The first tool we're going to look at is the Rectangular Array tool. Sometimes you need to make a lot of copies of objects in a rectangular pattern, and this tool is a great way to do it in one step. Let's say, for example, we needed to create a bunch of chairs, say setting up for a presentation. So one click on the tool and we're going to get our copies of our objects. So with the tool options, I can control how many copies I get and the number and the spacing between them. So for example, in this example, I can actually say that I want them to have exactly 1 inch between them. So we can set this to between, and I can set the distance between the rows if I want to. Right now I have it set to 1 foot, so there's 1 foot between the chairs, or we could set it based on the centers. So we could say we wanted this to fit, that we wanted 3 feet maybe between the centers to get that spacing that you see there. Or we could set the total dimension. So if we knew an area that we were going to fill, then we could set the total dimension and it would space it out evenly between there. And then we can also obviously control the numbers. So let's say we needed 10 rows that way and we needed 15 the other way. We can very quickly do that. And you see how quickly that was generated, and there we have all of our rectangular array. So that's the rectangular array tool. You can also do it in Z if you needed to go up into the third dimension. The next tool we're going to look at is the Radial Array tool. The Radial Array tool makes copies of objects around a rotation point. So I'm going to, in this example, just use this object. My rotation point becomes a hotspot then that I can move around, so you can see how I'm controlling the hotspot. I can control the number of points that we get. I can control whether these are aligned or not with the origin point, and I can also add a Z dimension to it. So in this case, by controlling that, and I'm going to change the angle to 180, for example, Now you can see we made a spiral stair using this tool. So this is the Radial Array tool. The last transformation tool that I'd like to show you is the Scale to Size tool. This tool is really good if you just have some entourage element or something that you need to get to a certain dimension where the dimension itself isn't particularly important, but you need to get it to a certain size. So for example, here I just clicked on this bench, and when I do it, you see it's measured using the X, Y, and Z bounding box of the object. It's telling us how what the dimensions were, and if I need to make this, maybe I need to make this 10 feet or to fit a certain dimension that I need somewhere, then I can easily do this to scale it to that size, and now the overall extent of that object is going to be 10 feet. So likewise, if we needed it to be a little bit higher, we could, or wider, we could do something like this just to get it to a particular size. And that is the Scale to Size tool. In formz 9, we brought back some tools from previous versions, including the Disturb Point tool, linear and circular waves, and the Spread tool. These disturbance tools were all in version 6, but people have been asking for them, so we've modernized them into version 9. Likewise, we've brought back the classic Edit Texture dialog for those who are used to editing textures in that manner, as well as the Metaball tools for those who are used to using those using that capability. We've also made some improvements to the file formats. A particular note is that the SketchUp format now does include export, so we can now export your formz files to SketchUp. The step format has been updated, especially on the Macintosh. OpenNURBS, DXF, DWG, FBX have all been updated to the latest versions of these formats, and we have a new direct translator for Photoshop because we no longer can use the QuickTime translator, as Apple has dropped support for that, as well as updating the other image translators like JPEG and TIFF to handle some more exotic compression types that have been encountered more recently. So another big feature of formz 9 is Python scripting. It's so big we have a separate video just talking about Python scripting, but it is an exciting new way to extend formz and customize, add your own capabilities, whatever you want to do with Python. So I encourage you to check out at formz.com/Python, and you can see the video there and learn more about Python scripting. Another major area of improvement in formz 9 is in the layout side. We're now calling it draft layout because we have brought back some of the classic drafting features from formz version 6. A lot of people have asked for to have the dual classic environment between paper space and world space in 2D, and so we've brought that back, and the new draft layout actually opens those version 6 classic draft files, and you can work with it. There's a lot of other improvements in performance and so on, and we'll have a separate video just to talk about formz draft layout, so check that out. So that completes this presentation of the highlights of what is new in formz version 9. There's a lot more little features that I didn't cover, which you can see in the program itself. I encourage everybody to check it out. I think you'll really be excited about the directions that formz is going in with formz version 9. Thanks.